people not leaving the country. This piece of legislation will help deal with that, and I see my time is quickly running out, Mr. Speaker, so I'll continue on after question period. Thank you.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary will have 12 minutes remaining in his time for speaking when the House resumes debate on this question, following question period. Déclaration de député, l'honorable député de Repentigny.
The Honourable Member for Repentigny. There's a place in Ottawa where the Bloc Québécois is recognized for what it is, a political party here for Quebec. There's a place in Ottawa where Liberals answer the questions we put to them. There's a place in Ottawa where members of Parliament debate issues concerning people in this country and where the government is forced to put away its song sheet and answer, and that's on CPAC. That's where people speak freely, where debate is held, where we all have our place. For 25 years, CPAC has been an important forum, which requires us to improve and work on our arguments, to stray off the beaten path. This half an hour per day of debate requires us to better prepare our arguments. It makes us better politicians. For 25 years, CPAC has played its pedagogical and democratic role with talent, dynamically. Congratulations. Long live CPAC.
Member for Mississauga-Streetsville.
Mr. Speaker, it was a busy and productive summer back in Mississauga-Streetsville. Some of the highlights included celebrating Canada 150 in Streetsville Square, throwing the first pitch at a Mississauga Tigers baseball game, and spending afternoons with the local youth in the Dam at Meadowville. I also conducted a roundtable with numerous pharmaceutical companies hosted by Roche. Another enjoyable part of the summer was visiting numerous employers through the Canada Summer Job Program who had hired over 300 students, teaching them the valuable life experiences that will help them in the future. But most importantly, I had the pleasure of meeting with countless constituents, whether in my office, coffee shops, at local fairs, or at events. And I must say, I'm happy to be back in the House to continue to voice their concerns and advocate on their behalf.
The Honourable Member for Banff-Airdrie.
Speaker, small business owners are the backbone of the Canadian economy, and they create jobs and countless opportunities in communities all across the country. And nowhere is that more true than in the riding that I have the privilege of representing in Banff-Airdrie. But the Prime Minister keeps trying to claim that these small business owners are somehow wealthy tax cheats. And he couldn't be further from the truth. Because we're not talking about the Prime Minister's millionaire friends. We're talking about hard-working, middle-class Canadians. It's the coffee shop down the street, it's the person who cuts your hair, and it's the mechanic who fixes your car. These are the people that the Liberal government is trying to tax right out of business. Mr. Speaker, there's nothing fair about a massive tax grab on the job creators in our communities. These are the people who support our local sports teams and sponsor our local charities. And every time the Prime Minister stands up and calls them wealthy tax cheats, he's insulting millions of Canadians who contribute so much to our country. This is a crippling tax increase on the very people the Liberals are claiming that they're trying to help, the middle-class Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Thunder Bay, Rainy River.
Mr. Speaker, this past month, Thunder Bay was honoured to host the 2017 Under-18 Baseball World Cup. Over 10 days, our city saw 50 baseball games played by teams from Canada, the United States, Cuba, Mexico, Nicaragua, Japan, Korea, Chinese Taipei, Italy, the Netherlands, South Africa, and Australia. Along with having the opportunity to watch the best young baseball players in the world in action, Thunder Bay also saw some incredible displays of sportsmanship and hospitality off the field. Moments before Team Cuba headed to Port Arthur Stadium for their game against Team Canada, players were gifted some baseball cleats by the employees of Canadian National Railways, the CN Police, and CP Police Associations. Moments like these make our whole city extremely proud. In closing, I want to take this chance to thank the organizers, volunteers, and athletes for their amazing work. You put on an extraordinary event. It was an honor to host these incredible young athletes, an incredible opportunity to showcase Thunder Bay and our region to the world.
The Honourable Member for Longueuil Saint-Hubert. Mr. Speaker, for 25 years I was able to follow my first passion, the music industry. I always thought that great societal projects were born out of culture, and it's because our cultural industry has never been so undermined and weakened by the digital revolution and abandoned by our governments that I decided to follow through on my convictions and go into politics. This week, I'm looking forward to the speech by the Minister of Heritage on the future of our cultural industries, and I have a lot of expectations, but I'm also worried that the new policy won't contain essential measures for continuity, equality, and support that our industries and a reflection on the screen here and throughout the world so direly need. Worried that the reform will not be as strong and fundamental for Quebec culture as were the quotas put in place by Pierre Junot or Bill 101 by Camille Laurent. Worried, unfortunately, that the federal government once again impose a wall-to-wall Canadian solution on Quebec when we have a cultural ecosystem all of our own, which is the envy of the entire world. I'll be listening to the speech by the minister on Thursday very carefully, and while I do have some hope, I must admit that...
Mr. Speaker, after a very busy and productive summer in my riding Brampton South, I'm happy to rise today. This summer, I joined my Brampton colleagues for a community celebration in July. I enjoyed seeing the diversity of my community through program, and we marked Canada 150 together. As chair of All-Party Diabetes Caucus, I visited Canadians across the country to discuss our healthy eating strategy and look at ways to reduce the impact of diabetes, which affects 11 million Canadians. I'm happy to be back in Ottawa to get back to work on the priorities which I heard during those consultations. I want to thank the hardworking healthcare advocates who met with me across the country and who are our allies. We move forward to defeat diabetes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Bravo.
The honourable member for Calgary-Midnapore.
Mr. Speaker, over the past month, I've hosted 2 town halls with business people from my riding of Calgary-Midnapore. They are so concerned about the impacts of this attack on small business that they took time away from their family and companies to share with me the shock they feel at that they are being punished for creating new businesses, employing Canadians, and contributing to the economy. Mr. Dunlaw has farmed all his life. These changes will mean it is cheaper for him to sell his family farm than to pass it down to his kids. Mr. Speaker, this is just sad. Dr. Julie Schell is a local veterinarian. Under this unfair tax policy, she would have to lay off employees, cancel new hires, and forget any plans to upgrade her equipment. These people are not the 1%. They are hard-working, middle-class families trying to make a living, which is becoming increasingly difficult under this Liberal government. I urge the Prime Minister, stop treating small business owners, the backbone of this country's economy, with such disrespect.
The honourable member for Vancouver Centre.
Mr. Speaker, autism affects 1 in 68 children. It restricts brain growth and social development. In my province of British Columbia, it impacts an estimated 56,000 people. The good news is that in BC, there's a place for families to go so they don't feel alone in their struggle. I'm excited to tell this House about the work of the Pacific Autism Family Network and their newest Autism Hub in Richmond. This provincial centre of excellence unites research, treatment and support for those affected by autism. Through spoke centres, it connects families, organisations and researchers in communities across the province. Mr. Speaker, I commend founder Wendy Liskia-Cochia for her vision and commitment to this cause, and the Pacific Autism Network team for their dedication in improving the lives of families with autism.
L'honorable député de Vimy.
The honourable member for Vimy. Mr. Speaker, it's a pleasure to be back on Parliament Hill after a busy summer in Vimy, my riding. I'm sure that we all worked hard in our respective ridings, especially my colleagues from out west affected by the forest fires. Last week in Vimy, I had the honour of joining many Canadians for Terry Fox Day, which succeeds each year on raising funds for research on cancer. Having lost our friend and colleague Arnold Chan, reminds us that everyone is affected by cancer one way or another. I want to thank everyone who participated across the country and the world in the event and who gives hope to people living with those conditions.
Those who donate, and to the Terry Fox Foundation for continuing the work, Terry's vision, a world without cancer. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week I stopped at the local gas station to fill up. Chad is one of the local owners and provides me with updates on the community. But last week was a bit different. He shared with me his thoughts on the proposed Liberal tax changes that impact his family. Chad is the youngest son of Sam and Camilla. Sam and Camilla have owned the local station for over 30 years. Sam is now ill, and for he and his wife, the store and station is their retirement. Sam and Camilla have assisted their children in post-secondary education through their hard work. But now, instead of living their retirement in dignity after working 60 to 70 hours weeks for decades, this government is throwing a wrench in their retirement. All of the financial risk they carried personally during their years of supporting their family through highs and lows no longer matter. I urge this government to start thinking about the small business owners in Elgin, Middlesex, London. They are not the 1%. There are farmers, renovators, home builders, restaurateurs, and retailers. Please start listening.
Honorable Deputy de Shefford.
The honourable member for Shefford. Good news, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to highlight the 100th anniversary of an extraordinary company, Industrie Lassonde in Rougemont, in my riding of Shefford. The company, which was founded in 1918 by Aristide Lassonde, is proud to launch its celebrations for its 100th anniversary. It's a jewel in our industrial tissue, and all people and workers are proud of it. As it associated itself and signed agreements with Sunkist and Sunmade, the company is still very much known for its products like Oasis and Rougemont. It's become the largest maker of fruit juice in North America, with its 2,100 employees and sales of over $1 billion per year. Industrie Lassonde makes an important link between agriculture, processing, and innovation. The company is a model of growth and success, and I wish them all the best in their celebrations.
Député de Brome-Missisquoi.
The honourable member for Brome-Missisquoi. Well, Mr. Speaker, I want to offer my congratulations to Jeremy Fontana and Julie Zettlinger and their team at Au Diable Vert in Glen Sutton for having won the prestigious prize Canada's Leading Wilderness Resort 2017 during the latest World Travel Awards. The Au Diable Vert is treetop accommodations, paths in the heart of Green Mountains, suspended bike canopy cycling, canoeing on the Missisquoi River, a magical place where their creativity generated innovative outdoor activities for our pleasure. Congratulations, Jeremy and Julie, for your vision and work. It's thanks to entrepreneurs like you that our region is so rich in recreational tourism options. And it's also the time for the vendange, for harvesting the grapes. Welcome to Brome-Missisquoi.
In speaking at the United Nations General Assembly last week, the Prime Minister had an opportunity to lay out a plan for Canada's leadership on the global stage. He could have asked the UN to appoint a humanitarian coordinator for the Venezuelan situation to address the inability of NGOs to deliver aid there. He could have challenged the world to support the Yazidis and announced when he was going to fulfill his promise to bring 1,200 Yazidis to Canada. He could have called upon the world to encourage Myanmar to give citizenship to the Rohingya people and allow aid organizations and journalists into Rakhine State. He could have supported the Secretary General in his calls for reforming the UN and called for a reallocation of the UN's budget to its human rights protection activities, which presently only receive 2% of the total budget. He could have called for the UNHCR to reform its operations to better protect genocide survivors, internally displaced persons, and persons facing immediate persecution. He could have done these things and more, but he did not. On the global stage, Canadians need someone who believes in doing more than speaking pretty, hollow words. Canada and the world deserves better.
Honourable member for Winnipeg South.
Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to rise and recognize the 100 amazing young women leaders on Parliament Hill today who are shadowing MPs as part of the University of Toronto's Women in the House program. This program was co-founded in 2013 by Tina Park and our very own Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations, and its aim is to promote greater representation of women in Canadian politics. Equality in decision-making is essential to the empowerment of women. When women participate fully in the public life of our country, Mr. Speaker, we all benefit from the diversity of perspectives, talent, and experience they contribute. To this end, since 2016, $13.5 million in Status of Women Canada funding has been approved to strengthen the participation of women in democratic life. Finally, Mr. Speaker, I would like to give a special welcome to Lydia and Heather, who are shadowing me today. Welcome to Parliament.
The honourable member for Essex.
Today I rise to honour Constable Robert Carrick, a police officer from the town of LaSalle in my riding. Constable Carrick lost his life while responding to a domestic violence call on August 23, 1969. He was 22 years old and had been an officer on the Sandwich West Police Force for only 3 years. He was the first to arrive at the violent scene, where despite the dangerous situation, he was able to safely get the wife, child, and babysitter out of harm's way before the husband opened fire and shot Carrick 5 times. Constable Carrick loved being a police officer, and he had a great love for helping people. His family described him as a generous person who would buy extra groceries or shoes, leaving them on the doorsteps of people who needed an extra helping hand. I want to also recognize the work of LaSalle Town Councillor Mike Akpata, who tabled a motion in Council, and LaSalle Police Deputy Chief Chuck Scanlon, who was very active on this issue. Their work led to Constable Carrick's memory being properly celebrated on August 20th this year, when our community gathered to honour the service of this hometown hero with the dedication of the Robert C. Carrick Memorial Tunnel. I hope everyone in this House will join me in expressing our thanks to all police officers, first responders, and frontline workers who have lost their lives on the job in our communities.
Honourable member for Milton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I rise in the House to recognize that September is World Alzheimer's Awareness Month. While September 21st was actually the day that we remind ourselves of Alzheimer's, there is an estimated 564,000 Canadians living with dementia and about 25,000 new cases diagnosed each year. And in 2016, we were one of those cases, Mr. Speaker. But I want you to know something. I want you to know, and I want this House to know, that in the past 16 months, I've learned a lot. I've learned that it's incredibly frustrating that there's no treatment or cure for Alzheimer's. I have learned that you need to be prepared to have everything take just a lot longer to get out the door, a lot longer to describe issues, a lot longer to talk about directions going to the grocery store. But most important, what I want the House to know, Mr. Speaker, is that living with dementia, it can be okay. You know, we have a good life. Bruce, we focus on things that Bruce can do, not the things that we can no longer do. We keep our health well, we sleep, we eat well, he exercises, we socialize together, these things that actually matter. And Mr. Speaker, I want you to know, and I want the House of Commons to know, that life can be okay with dementia and Alzheimer's, and I'll continue to update the House as we continue our journey.
The honourable member for Ajax.
This month marks the 15th anniversary of cybertip.ca, a tip line for reporting the online sexual exploitation of children. Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Speaker, it's absolutely essential in our efforts to protect children to continue working with this organization. It's an essential partner in our national strategy for the protection of children from sexual exploitation on the internet, and has been since the strategy was launched by Minister Anne McClellan.
In the last 15 years alone, it has received 266,000 tips, 40,000 in the last year alone. Every tip represents a child's victimization, but also a step towards the rescue of that child and the apprehension of the predator. We are so lucky and grateful to have this program. We're so grateful for the work it does. We only wish it wasn't necessary.
Oral questions, questions orales. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians tell us how much they are worried about the Prime Minister's proposed tax increases on local businesses, farmers and small business owners, as well as everyone they employ are concerned. This is happening throughout the country, and hundreds of people are wondering how these tax increases are going to affect their jobs and their retirement plans. Will the Prime Minister listen to what Canadians are saying and finally stop increasing taxes on local businesses? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we've heard the concerns of Canadians throughout the country, and I can reassure them that we are not going to affect small businesses or the middle class. We have committed to helping the middle class, and that is why we lowered taxes, and we've increased taxes for those who are wealthiest. We've always committed to helping small businesses with support, with innovation, with the type of support that they need to succeed. We know that the economy depends on it, and that's why are always going to support small and medium businesses.
Owners use legitimate tools like passive investments to save for things like the future growth and expansion of their operations. And they also use it as a rainy day fund to get them through when times are tough. Now the Liberals want to tax these savings at a rate of up to 73%. So a simple question, when it comes to these increased taxes on passive investments, in the long run, can the Prime Minister tell us exactly how much more revenue the government will collect?
That's right.
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we have a system that we inherited from the Conservatives that allows wealthy Canadians to use private corporations as a way of paying lower tax rates than middle-class Canadians. We don't think that's fair. When it comes to passive investments, it's actually interesting, Mr. Speaker, that 2%, the top 2% of private corporations hold 80% of all the passive income in this country. That's wealthy Canadians that we want to make sure pay their fair share in taxes. That's what all Canadians want, Mr. Speaker. That's what we're delivering on.
Order. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
So, Mr. Speaker, that seems to be a no. He can't tell us exactly how much the government will collect. And what we do know is that when they raised taxes, even on the 1%, that they ended up collecting less revenue. Department officials show that. So what we're learning is that this Liberal government is so incompetent that they can't even raise taxes properly. And a new report confirms that 81% of middle-class families are paying more in taxes under the Liberals. But he admits that his new changes won't touch his own family fortune. So why does it always seem that the Prime Minister's plans are designed to hurt everybody but himself?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, interesting that new report completely overlooked the Canada Child Benefit. We are giving 9 out of 10 Canadian families more money every single month with the high costs of raising their kids. And the way we're doing that is not sending it to wealthy families like the Leader of the Opposition's or mine. We are giving it to the families who need the help. And the way we're doing that is actually having an impact on Canadians right across the country as we're reducing child poverty by 40% in this country. That's what this government sees as important. That's what this government's going to continue to do.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
He doesn't seem to need the child tax benefit, but he sure doesn't mind taking taxpayers' money for government-funded nannies. And you know, with these increased tax hikes, the average family is now paying close to $1,000 more every year in taxes. That's money that should be going to pay for things like bus passes, hockey practice, and swimming lessons, not new taxes. But the Prime Minister is always out there looking for more because he has a spending problem. And the first step is always to admit that you have a problem. So will the Prime Minister admit that he has a problem and abandon these unfair tax rates?
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the very first thing we did in government was lower taxes for the middle class and raise them on the wealthiest 1%, with that party voted against. The next thing we did was bring in a Canada Child benefit that gives more money to 9 out of 10 Canadian families with the high cost of raising their kids. But only 9 out of 10 Canadian families, because the wealthiest families no longer receive Canada Child benefits, unlike what the Conservative government previously did. We know the best way to help this country grow is to help those who need it, not those who don't.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Just his wealthy family get a portion of taxpayers for looking after his kids. But the Prime Minister's tax increases are going to hurt middle-class Canadians who are trying to run their business, and their staff are worried, facing with reduced hours and an increased chance of layoffs. Now, he either doesn't care or he's completely oblivious to the impact of his policies, except he's quite sure that these new rules won't affect his own family fortune. So why won't the Prime Minister give the same protection to middle-class Canadians that his family trust enjoys?
Right, Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we need a system that is fair for everyone. The current system encourages wealthy families to actually use private corporations to pay a lower tax rate than middle-class Canadians. That's not fair. Canadians elected us to fix it, and that's exactly what we're going to do. We're doing it because it's both the right thing to do and it's the smart thing to do. From lowering taxes on the middle class and raising them on the wealthiest 1% to delivering a Canada Child benefit, we've created opportunity and economic growth for the middle class across this country after 10 years of failures from...
The Honourable Member for Outremont, order. Yesterday, the government released new directives on torture. These directives still allow the use of intelligence obtained under torture. For the NDP, regardless of the context, the torture of a human being is never defensible. How can this Prime Minister, who claims to be a champion of human rights, agree with using information extracted under torture? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, torture is forbidden by the Criminal Code, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, by the international community, and by our Canadian values. The new directives that we have implemented reinforce the prohibition against torture. We will not accept torture. That's what Canadians expect from us. We will always do what must be done to protect Canadians' values and rights while keeping them safe. The Honourable Member for Outremont.
Torture is poison, but he's not shy about using the fruits of that poisonous tree, Mr. Speaker. Earlier this year in this place, the Minister of Public Safety stated that torture was contrary to the Charter. He also said, and I quote, "Torture is found to be abhorrent by Canadians, and we reject it." You cannot claim to stand up for human rights on the one hand and be complicit in torture on the other, Mr. Speaker. How can the Prime Minister stand in this place and defend the use of information obtained by torture?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
On the contrary, Mr. Speaker, torture is prohibited by the Criminal Code. It's against the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It's condemned by the international community, and it's abhorrent to Canadian values. That's why the strengthened ministerial directives we put forward actually reinforce the prohibitions against torture and reassure Canadians that we will do everything we can to keep them safe while upholding our Charter of Rights and Freedoms and our values.
Member for Outremont.
You're not prohibiting the use of the fruits of torture. That's what's wrong here, Mr. Speaker.
What did the Lobbying Commissioner, the Official Languages Commissioner, and the Ethics Commissioner have in common? All three started investigations on the Prime Minister, and all three are now looking for a new job. The government spent more than $2 million looking for new commissioners, and all that was put forward was the botched appointment of a partisan Liberal. What's the real reason? Is it possible that they want lapdogs instead of watchdogs? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Since we've taken power, we have implemented a new appointment process, which has led to appointments throughout the government that better reflect Canada's diversity. A record number of women, a record number of Indigenous people, and people from visible minorities. We have implemented a better way of choosing people. It is merit-based. We are going to continue to choose people who reflect the vast diversity and strengths of Canada. The Honourable Member for Outremont.
The Ethics Commissioner launched an investigation into the Prime Minister's private billionaire island vacation, coming up on a year since the Lobbying Commissioner began looking into Liberal fundraisers hosted by the head of pharmaceutical giant Apotex. And by the way, we just learned that Apotex is suing the Lobbying Commissioner to stop that investigation. It's hard to keep track of all these scandals, Mr. Speaker. My question to the Prime Minister is, what the heck happened? What happened to his promise of respect for Parliament and empowering the independent officers? They say power corrupts, but boy, this was awful fast, Mr. Speaker.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians expect a government that is open and transparent, that cooperates with all investigations, that encourages a level of public disclosure never before seen. As a party and as a government, we have consistently raised the bar on openness and transparency, including when it comes to fundraising. And I encourage the members opposite to follow the new rules on fundraising to prevent from fundraising in secret, behind closed doors, and refusing to let journalists see just who they're raising money from.
Yes. L'honorable député de...
The Honourable Member for Richmond. Order. The Honourable Member for Richmond, Arthabaska. Mr. Speaker, as many businesses are worried because of NAFTA negotiations, this Liberal government here in Canada is attacking our small local businesses, farmers, electricians, entrepreneurs, restaurant owners, constantly taxing them more and more, with the result being job losses throughout all of Canada. Can the Prime Minister finally give a break to our middle-class workers and stop taking ever more money from their pockets to pay down their enormous deficit that they created themselves? The Honourable Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, we know that our current tax system encourages the wealthiest to incorporate to reduce their level of tax. That's not a good system. We are going to consider measures to improve our system. At the same time, we are acting to improve our economy. For small and medium businesses, it is very important to have an economy that works. Fortunately, that is our case now. A high level of growth with many jobs, many new jobs, and that's very important for small and medium businesses. The member for Richmond Arthabaska. Mr. Speaker, the minister can repeat his message as much as he wants. He cannot deny that our job creators, small and medium businesses, farmers, local businesses, those who create 90% of jobs in our country by working hard day after day, are going to be hard hit by this tax reform that is not fair. Can the Prime Minister and Minister of Finance stop lecturing us every day during question period and end this direct attack on our local businesses, our job creators, those who create jobs throughout all of Canada? The Honourable Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, that is not at all the case. We are looking for ways to improve our tax system. We are going to find a way of having a system where there are incentives for people to invest in their business. That's very important. We have to have a fair tax system, a tax system that encourages the wealthiest to incorporate to pay lower taxes than the middle class, that's not a fair system. We want a system that is fair and at the same time offers opportunities to invest in their active businesses.
Speaker, Mr. Speaker, this past Saturday I was at the Halifax West High School, where there are over 400 residents crammed into the cafeteria to talk about these tax changes. I listened to their stories and I actually shared their concerns, and yet I was the only member of Parliament in attendance. That's right, not one single one of those 32 Atlantic members of Parliament were there to listen or to defend their government policy. So, if their own members of Parliament are not willing to defend this policy, when's the minister going to drop these changes?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we know that citizens in Atlantic Canada and across the country want a tax system that's fair. They want to make sure that the system doesn't encourage the richest to incorporate so they can have a lower tax rate than the middle class. We're out listening to people. So I, too, was in Nova Scotia listening to small business owners and professionals. I, too, was in New Brunswick listening to the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, and we're going to continue listening to them. We know that what we're focused on is measures that are helping the very wealthiest. We know that 80% of assets and passive investment are in 2% of small companies. So what we're doing is making sure our system is fair.
Honourable Member for Milton.
May have gone to Atlantic Canada, Mr. Speaker, but he absolutely did not hear from constituents. Let me give you an example. On the same day that he decided he wasn't going to go to this incredibly large gathering, 400 people, he did have a private, closed-door little session 15 kilometers down the road. Here's the thing about it, Mr. Speaker. When the public tried to get in, you know what they did? They locked the door. So I want to know, even if he can't defend these changes to the general public, I'm wondering, will he stop locking people out and start listening?
Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, being in a situation where you're trying...
Order. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, as the members opposite focus on how they can help the wealthiest to maintain tax breaks not available to other middle-class Canadians, what we're trying to do is ensure that our system works for the long term. So I will continue to be out listening to Canadians. That's very important. We know that as we move forward, Canadians want to make sure that we get this right. They want to ensure that we continue to have investments in our small businesses, incentives to do so. We'll do that. But at the same time, we're going to make sure the system works for all Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Carleton.
The Prime Minister and the Finance Minister are not only helping the wealthy, they're doing it by helping themselves. The Prime Minister said his family fortune will be sheltered from these changes. The Finance Minister has structured the changes so that they won't apply to any company that trades on the stock market, like his billion-dollar family business. So while Ma and Pa on the corner store will pay higher taxes, his billionaire company will not. Why will the bill on Main Street be so much higher than bill on Bay Street?
Honourable Minister of Finance.
Well, Mr. Speaker, this sort of scaremongering is what's going on across our country. The fact of the matter is, we are going to make sure that small business rates, tax rates, stay low. We're going to make sure that small businesses can continue to invest in their business. That is our ongoing commitment. What we're doing is making sure, however, that the system doesn't advantage the very wealthiest in our society over the middle class. This is important. We, on this side of the House, can actually do two things at the same time. Help small businesses to invest, keep tax rates low. That's what we're going to do.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Member for Carleton.
They are doing two things at the same time. They're protecting his family fortune and his family fortune. Just scaremongering. If it's not true that their fortunes are sheltered, give me one example of a change in these proposals that will raise taxes on the Prime Minister's fortune or on the Finance Minister.
Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we know from having taken a look at our tax code that
most members are able to sit through a question period. Most members in all parties, in fact, are able to sit through a question period and not react when someone else is speaking and wait until the mic's on in front of them and it's their turn to speak before doing so. And I would ask the rest to show a little respect for opposing views. Whether they like what they're saying or not, we have to listen to them in a democracy. The honourable member for Sherbrooke.
Mr. Speaker, everyone remembers the fraud orchestrated by UBS Bank in Switzerland to help the more fortunate, including Canadians, avoid paying taxes. 10 years later, the Minister of Revenue is refusing to meet one of the main whistleblowers in this matter. It's completely absurd. A former bank employee wants to share information on cases of tax evasion, and the minister is refusing to just listen to him. Let's be serious for 2 minutes. Can the minister explain to us why she is refusing to listen to the information from this whistleblower who has allowed the Americans to collect a significant amount of money? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Mr. Speaker, our government is fully committed to fighting tax evasion and aggressive tax avoidance. In our last budgets, we've invested almost $1 billion to counter fraudsters. Our plan is generating results. Last year, $13 billion was announced that would be collected. 335 cases were referred to criminal investigations. $44 million in penalties were imposed. If individuals have information to give to us, Mr. Speaker, we have a whistleblower program. The Honourable Member for Rosemont-Patrie. Just need to meet him.
Like Dory's in the movie Nemo. Small business tax reduction, never heard of that. But they promised to tackle big loopholes for CEOs that cost us hundreds of millions. Not anymore. In fact, on the radio, the finance minister said that issue is not something that we've backed away from. It's just not something we've moved forward on. Come on! Why the Liberals are targeting the little guys and are protecting their wealthy friends of Bay Street?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to take that question. We took a look at our tax code. We took a look at where significant advantages were going to wealthy Canadians just by incorporating. What they're able to do is reduce their tax rate lower than those in the middle class. We know that that's not fair. We also know that it is not something that's going to allow people to make investments in the ongoing success of our economy. So we are focused on how we can make the system fair, how we can encourage small businesses, all businesses to invest. We're going to move forward with these measures after listening to Canadians about how to do them properly. That's really important. We'll end up with a tax system that's more fair.
The Honourable Member for Beauport, Côte-de-Beaupré, Île-d'Orléans, Charlevoix. Many questions on the new Liberal tax and always the same song and dance. Liberals are insulting farmers with their meaningless words. Farmers, their families, and people in my riding who buy our local quality products at affordable prices are worried. The Minister of Agriculture is casting doubt in their minds instead of encouraging them to grow Canada's prosperity. When will the minister stop being a yes man for the Prime Minister and shoulder his responsibility to defend farmers?
Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Speaker, we want to create a tax system that's fair for Canadians. We are listening to farmers and encourage them to share their ideas as to how to create a fair tax system. Being a farmer, Mr. Speaker, I truly understand saving money for a rainy day. I know that my colleague would not want to mislead farmers. The fact is, the money that's saved in the corporation is there, fully available for the farmers to use on buying equipment, buying land, increasing their company, making sure that the farming succeeds. What we're going to do is create more business, not less business, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Foothills.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I find the Agriculture Minister's answer very interesting. He said that money invested in a corporation is there for a corporation. But clearly he doesn't understand his own tax changes. The Finance Minister is taking the ability away from farmers to save for their retirement, invest in their own operations, or put money away for a rainy day and a down year. Canadian farmers understand the implications that these changes will have. It will devastate rural communities and it will wipe out the family farm. Will the Agriculture Minister stand with farmers? Will he stand up against the Finance Minister and beg him to back down from these tax changes?
Minister of Agriculture.
As I indicated, Mr. Speaker, this government would create a more fair tax system. I'm sure my honourable colleague would never want to mislead farmers. The fact of the matter is, the money that's invested in the corporation is fully available if my honourable colleague wishes to listen. The fact is the money is fully there and available for the farmer to build buildings, buy property, increase their business. In fact, what this government wants to do is make sure there's more investment, more business expansion. And with the tax changes, there will be more business expansion, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member from Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, now I understand. What's the difference between the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Agriculture? There isn't any. Both consider farmers to be a cash cow to pay the Liberal deficit. 43,000 farmers' families in Canada are desperately asking both ministers to extend consultations, and both have refused to hear them. Mr. Speaker, farmers don't get to benefit from Morneau Chappelle's advice. They don't have time to take part in privileged access events with the Prime Minister. If the Minister of Agriculture has no influence with his colleagues to change things, who else is going to stand up to defend the survival of our family farms? We are pleased to have a fair tax system, but we know that it's not actually the case. We need to give people who incorporate to pay a lower tax rate than the middle class, and that's not fair. For farmers, I know that they can continue with the way that they invest in their farms. That's very important. We are going to continue to listen to be sure that farmers can continue with their important affairs for our country.
Chilliwack-Hope.
Well, Mr. Speaker, for generations, family farms have been the heart and soul of my community. Farming families work side by side and share in the risk and rewards of making their farms a success. That way of life is now threatened by the Liberal proposal to introduce crippling new taxes that can make transferring the family farm to the next generation next to impossible. Why are the Liberals threatening to kill family farms with their tax changes while the multi-millionaire owners of Bay Street businesses like Morneau Chappelle won't pay an extra cent?
The Honourable Minister of Agriculture.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we indicated many times in this House, what we want to do is create a more fair tax system. These transactions are very complex and have been very complex for many years. What we want to do is hear the view from the farmers as to how we handle these transactions and make sure that we're able to help farmers move their family farm from one generation to the other. What we want to do is hear from the farmers.
Order. The Honourable Member for Longueuil Saint-Hubert. Mr. Speaker, this evening the Minister of Foreign Affairs will host a dinner at the National Arts Centre as part of the NAFTA negotiation. By choosing this venue, she said she wanted to demonstrate the importance of cultural exemption to the agreement. Bravo. But I hope this is not just an empty symbolic action, because all of the signatories of the Pan-Canadian Coalition for Culture are concerned. They all remember when the Heritage Minister went to Silicon Valley to talk about this issue and came back empty-handed. Can the Minister of Foreign Affairs reassure our artists that she will not sell off our cultural protections? The Honourable Minister of Heritage. The cultural exemption is a priority for our government. We recognize the importance of artistic and cultural contributions to our economy and society. NAFTA did create economic growth and jobs for the middle class. We will continue to work nationally and internationally to preserve cultural diversity in the digital age.
Essex.
While we remain hopeful that our NAFTA partners will see the importance of treating workers fairly, the NDP and workers are concerned. The side agreements on labour standards are weak and unenforceable, and despite the minister's talking points, Canadian officials told media yesterday that there was little chance of progress. We cannot continue to allow quality Canadian jobs to be exported to Mexico and right-to-work states where workers are paid as little as $1 an hour. Will the minister stand up for Canadian jobs, commit to making real progress on workers' safety, rights and income fairness?
Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, Speaker, our government is absolutely committed to advancing the cause of workers' rights through NAFTA and through the NAFTA negotiations. In fact, we are very proud in these negotiations to have put forward the most progressive, the strongest labour chapter that Canada has ever put forward in a negotiation. We are very aware that it is unfair to expect our workers to be part of a race to the bottom and compete against workers with lower standards, and that is what we're saying at the table.
The honourable member for South Shore, St. Margaret's.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Vice Chair of the House of Commons Standing Committee on the Status of Women. As she will know, today the committee was unable to elect a chair. Can the Vice Chair inform the House of the agenda of the committee going forward considering this new development?
Just a minute. Order, order, order. As members know, questions about the agenda of a committee are in order. The Honourable Vice Chair of the committee.
Leader of the official opposition put forward the member for Lethbridge as the Conservative nominee as Chair of the Status of Women Committee. Someone who does not support a woman's right to choose. We believe that a committee as important as ours needs to be chaired by an individual
Vice Chair has the floor.
We believe that a committee as important as ours needs to be chaired by an individual who will protect and advance women's rights. I hope the leader of the official opposition will reconsider and put forward someone who believes in those...
Order, order. Order. Members are complaining about what the member is saying, but I can't possibly hear it without the yelling. So members, if they want the speaker to hear, to know if there is a breach of the rules, members are going to have to... Order. Order. Members want the speaker to listen for breaches of the rules. Members are going to have to allow the speaker to hear what is said. The honourable member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals have admitted that a record 40,000 people will make asylum claims to Canada this year. Many of these claims will be made by people illegally crossing the U.S.-Canada border, and many of these claims will be found invalid. News reports show that the cost of processing these claims alone, never mind the social assistance payments, is projected to be over $500 million.
Shameful.
Will the Liberals close the loophole in the Safe Third Country Agreement, or is the government's new tax on small businesses going to pay for the cost of these false asylum claims?
The Minister of Immigration.
Speaker, the Safe Third Country Agreement is not about denying asylum. It's about an agreement between the United States and Canada on the orderly processing of asylum claimants. We have a robust system that we're proud of. Canada is a welcoming country, and we value orderly migration while also ensuring the safety and security of Canadians. The member opposite must know that the IRB is a quasi-independent judicial body that looks at all asylum claims, determines the merits of each and every case. If you have a need of protection, you get to stay in Canada, and if you don't, you get to be removed.
Member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Mr. Speaker, the Safe Third Country Agreement acknowledges that we shouldn't allow border shopping between the U.S. and Canada border, number one. Second, the minister does not acknowledge the fact that the IRB is not processing claims in a timely manner, and this is going to cost Canadians billions of dollars, and it's preventing people like Yazidi genocide survivors from coming to Canada. So why is the government, when they're looking at 300,000 more people in the same situation in the United States, not closing the loophole in the Safe Third Country Agreement?
Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Mr. Speaker, the Safe Third Country Agreement is an agreement that works fantastically well for Canada. We use it to cooperate with the United States on the orderly management of asylum claims. We recognize that the situation presented challenges, but we demonstrated time and again that we were ready and we were nimble enough to manage the situation responsibly. The member opposite must know that asylum claims fluctuate on a yearly basis and sometimes even on a monthly basis. The fact of the matter is our agencies were nimble enough. We were able to put more capacity within IRCC to process claims and move the situation.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, I'd like the Minister to explain to me why last month international media reported on cases of asylum seekers arriving at our borders with child pornography. Worse, they reported that there are no guidelines for dealing with such cases. Canadians want to be certain that criminals are not crossing our borders, Mr. Speaker. So, can the Prime Minister inform this House when Canadians can expect to see national guidelines about how to deal with this serious problem?
Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
Canadians can be absolutely assured that in dealing with extraordinary circumstances at the border, that all Canadian laws are enforced and that all Canadian international obligations are respected. That has in fact been the case throughout the past 7 or 8 months of activity at the border, and in fact, when a specific case of criminal activity is discovered, it is in fact referred to police authorities for the proper prosecution.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, in Quebec, a record number of illegal asylum seekers have crossed the border this year. Every day, the number of illegal crossings grows. As we heard today, the Liberals don't want to take responsibility for this problem. Will the Liberals finally admit that the Prime Minister's Twitter message inviting everyone and anyone to come to Canada, combined with their inaction, has created this crisis? Will they finally commit to closing the loophole in the Safe Third Country Agreement?
Honourable Minister of Immigration.
That we will always be a welcoming country for those seeking protection from persecution, war and terror. That's what the Prime Minister's tweet said. We recognize that the situation presented certain challenges, and our agencies, including the IRCC, RCMP and CBSA, were able to nimbly move quickly enough to address the situation. Mr. Speaker, we know that that party, when they were in government, did not respond to the largest humanitarian crisis at the time. They were mean enough to cut refugee health care, so we will never take lessons on refugees from that party.
The Honourable Member for Nanaimo, Ladysmith.
Oil spills and marine debris from thousands of abandoned vessels pollute our waterways and threaten local tourism and fishing jobs. After years of neglect, the Liberals won't commit the resources needed to deal with the backlog of abandoned vessels. This week, the Union of BC Municipalities will vote on a resolution urging the Liberal government to adopt my legislation to solve the long-standing abandoned vessel problem. When will this government finally listen to coastal communities? And will it support my legislation to clean up our coasts?
Honourable Minister of Transport.
Mr. Speaker, of course, we've been listening to our Prime Minister announced the Oceans Protection Plan on the 7th of November. We announced the Abandoned Boats Program in May. Minister of Fisheries and myself were in Vancouver 3 weeks ago announcing another cleanup program. Last week we tabled the Nairobi Convention, International Convention on Abandoned Vessels. I don't know why this person is not listening to all the initiatives that we are taking to clean up our coast.
The Honourable Member for Courtenay Alberni.
Talk about who's not listening and not showing up. Last week, this government announced on Twitter that it signed on to the UN Clean Seas Initiative. But today, it's obvious there's no funding and no plan to meet our obligations. Unfortunately, tweets and selfies won't clean our coastlines. Volunteers in my riding of Courtenay Alberni are now in their 10th month cleaning up the largest marine debris spill in decades on the West Coast. Yet there's been zero funding for this cleanup from the Liberal government. Just delays, excuses, and rhetoric. When will this government finally get to work and fund the cleanup of the Hanjin debris field?
Honourable Minister of Transport.
Mr. Speaker, as part of the Oceans Protection Plan, we made it very clear, of course, that we are introducing legislation with respect to abandoned and wrecked vessels. I've just outlined several things related to that, but also part of the Oceans Protection Plan is to hold the ships that are responsible for losing some of their cargo to clean up the cargo themselves. That's going to be part of the Oceans Protection Plan.
Honourable Member for Lethbridge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Speaker, once again, we have the Liberals lining the pockets of Liberal insiders. The Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations has limited resources in order to support the welfare of First Nations children. So it's shocking to me and Canadians that she gave $500,000 to a Liberal friend rather than investing in the well-being of children. Wow. So why is it that the Liberals put the interests of the former Liberal candidate ahead of the interests of Aboriginal children?
Honourable Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations.
Speaker, our government is committed to completely overhauling the Child and Family Services in full partnership with First Nations communities. The Special Representative met with 261 chiefs, experts, officials, advocates, and individuals, and lived experience from coast to coast to coast to inform our commitment to First Nations child welfare reform. We look forward to receiving a report and recommendations on how we can transform the system to better support and reflect the needs of First Nations children and put their well-being first.
The Honourable Member for Barrie, Springwater, Oro-Medonte.
Mr. Speaker, Cynthia Wesley-Eskimo and the Liberals are out of touch with the Indigenous Canadians that they are supposed to be serving. When Cindy Blackstock, an advocate for Indigenous youth, questioned the $500,000 payout for what she called a public relations exercise, Wesley-Eskimo fired back saying, if Cindy and her bunch would work together and stop attacking me, we could get a lot more done. Can the minister tell this House if she agrees with the statements of this former Liberal candidate turned Liberal advisor?
The Honourable Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations.
We acknowledge the disproportionate number of Indigenous children in the child welfare system. We believe that the transformation requires investments in children, families, and communities, not in lawyers, agencies, and non-Indigenous foster families. The MSR was critical to understanding the needs of communities in order to overhaul the system and prevent children from entering the system at all.
The Honourable Member for Barrie, Innisfil.
Mr. Speaker, the only priority of these Liberals is padding the pockets of their Liberal friends. When criticized, Eskimo defended her lavish payout, saying it was appropriate because she would have to pay too much in taxes. If all this minister can do is attempt to justify paying a failed Liberal candidate $500,000 for a few months' work, will the senior minister of that portfolio sitting beside her at least stand up in this House and condemn this outrageous payout?
Honourable Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations.
Mr. Speaker, time and time again, we have heard from First Nations communities that the present system is not in the best interests of children. We need to listen to communities, and that's what the MSR did, because they do not believe, the communities do not believe that the perverse incentives that now agencies have are in the best interests of their children.
The Honourable Member for Guelph.
Mr. Speaker, we know that CETA is a progressive trade agreement that provides significant advantages for both Canadians and Europeans, and will mean Canada's access to over 500 million EU customers and their GDP of $22 trillion. This is great news for Canada's hard-working farmers, ranchers, and growers. Can the Minister of Agriculture highlight some of the successes that the implementation of CETA will mean for Canada's farmers and their farm families?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I think my honourable colleague from Guelph said it will certainly be a success for Canadian farmers, and it will increase our exports by $1.5 billion. It could mean $600 million in the beef industry, $400 million in the pork industry, and $100 million in the grain industry, and a further $300 million in processed foods, fruits, and vegetables. This historic agreement will grow our economy, put more money in the farmers' pockets, and help more people join the middle class. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Mr. Speaker, this Liberal government is very selective in its approach to the economics of justice. The Liberals spend millions fighting clearly losing battles in court against Indigenous children and women. But the Liberals abandoned a principal defence of Omar Khadr's extravagant claim with a $10 million payoff they tried to keep secret. The Public Safety Minister
blithely claims that by caving on Qatar, he saved taxpayers millions. Mr. Speaker, that's an unacceptable answer while this government moves to tax Canadian small businesses literally to death. How's that fair?
The Honourable Minister of Public Safety.
In the Qatar case was precisely and specifically whether the behaviour of Canadian government officials had violated the rights of a Canadian citizen while that individual was in jail. On at least 2 previous occasions, the Supreme Court of Canada ruled with absolute clarity that the answer was yes, no matter how unpopular the individual in question might be. Mr. Speaker, rights are not determined by popularity polls or shock jocks on radio. They are determined by the rule of law and the Constitution. And in the process, we save taxpayers millions of dollars.
The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Order. Mr. Speaker, yesterday I launched a campaign called Stop the Theft of Our Pensions in Jonquière. I did this along with auto workers, steel workers, and retired Rio Alcan, Sears, and Abitibi Consol workers. They were all happy that the NDP was there to defend the pensions of workers in Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean. Because the Liberals promised all sorts of things during the election campaign, and now that they're in power, they haven't done anything. Today, the pensions of Sears employees and retirees are in jeopardy. When will the government make it illegal to embezzle people's pensions? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, these cases are regulated by the Bankruptcy Act in Canada, and we try to strike a balance between workers' rights to their pension and giving the company an opportunity to continue to operate and to employ people. So we are monitoring this situation carefully, but Mr. Speaker, we're trying to find a balance. The Honourable Member for Saint-Boniface-Saint-Vital. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For decades, the RCMP has been in possession of Métis artifacts, including clothing, a book of poems, a crucifix, and a hunting knife that belonged to Louis Riel.
Advocates have been calling for the items to be returned to the Métis Nation for generations. Can the Minister of Public Safety please update the House on the status of the artifacts?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased that the RCMP has signed an agreement with the Manitoba Métis Federation and the Métis National Council that will see the Riel artifacts returned to the Métis people. According to the agreement, the items will remain on display at the RCMP Heritage Centre in Regina while the Métis Nation finds a more suitable location. These important historical artifacts are being returned to the Métis in the spirit of reconciliation. The agreement is also a recognition of rights and a demonstration of respect, cooperation, and partnership.
Honourable Member for Niagara West.
Mr. Speaker, at a time when our retail sector is in crisis, the last thing that Canada needs is another retailer going under. Sears Canada has a long and proud tradition in Canada, employs thousands of Canadians in every region. As everyone knows, Sears is currently undergoing a restructuring process. Will the minister take action and support the efforts currently being undertaken by the executive chairman to save the retailer and most of the 15,000 jobs now at risk and avoid the company being liquidated?
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Economic Development.
Mr. Speaker, obviously we follow these situations very carefully. As this process is being regulated by the law, we won't comment specifically. But the law does search, Mr. Speaker, to balance the rights that workers have, but also give the company an opportunity in restructuring or when it's being sold to make sure it protects the workers and their jobs, Mr. Speaker. So once again, we are looking for balance. We do that through the application of the law and our procedures.
The Honourable Member for Pierre Boucher des Patriotes Verchères. Mr. Speaker, in the spring, Donald Trump said that he wanted to withdraw aluminum from the free trade agreement because for reasons related to of public safety. This is a way of giving contracts to the states. Aluminum is the second largest export resource in Quebec and employs thousands of people in Lac-Saint-Jean. Can the government reassure us and the aluminum workers that their jobs will not be put on the table during the NAFTA negotiations? The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs. I want to reassure the honourable member and all Canadians that the rights of workers in all sectors are very important to our government, and they will be during the NAFTA negotiations. This includes workers in the aluminum sector. This is a very important issue for us. We know that the U.S. administration is a protectionist one, but we are working for our workers. The honourable member for Mirabel. Mr. Speaker, our farmers have gotten used to being disdained by the Liberal government. Dairy and cheese producers were mistreated by CETA, and they will now be mistreated with the compensation deal. Now, once again, they're going to be left behind by the NAFTA negotiations. Will the government finally protect the supply management system in its entirety in Quebec? The Honourable Minister of Foreign Affairs. Mr. Speaker, we are here to help our milk and dairy producers all across Canada. When it comes to dairy products, I am confident that Canada will respect all of its international trade obligations. And I would remind everyone that the U.S. have a 5-to-1 surplus in their dairy trade with Canada.
Conclude question period for today. The honourable
member for Mirabel is rising on a point of order. Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I believe that you will acknowledge that there is unanimous consent for the following amendment, that the government ensure that it ensures or provides keep the supply management in the NAFTA agreement. Does the House have the consent? The House has heard the terms of the motion. Is it the pleasure of the House to adopt the motion?
Adopted.
Adopted. Honourable member for Madagascar Restigouche is rising on a point of order. Mr. Speaker, just a few. It was impossible for people in the House to hear the response for the member for Oakville North Burlington. I believe that you couldn't hear it either. How can we ensure that parliamentarians can hear the answers in the House when it's impossible to hear our colleagues' comments?
Je remercie l'honorable député de ses comments.
I thank the honourable member for his comment.